What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show where we dig into various mock drafts in the entire offseason, working our way up to fantasy draft season in August. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are back at it again with another rookie mock. Rookies are the flavor of the month right now with the draft having just wrapped up. You may have noticed already my co-host Austin was not able to be with me today, but instead I got the founder of Club Fantasy and my great friend, Joshua Hudson. I got you up way too early on a Monday. It's just like the NFL season. How you doing today, buddy?
Facts. It's too early for this shit. But you know what? I had to hop on because I was lucky enough to be able to get in touch with Tom and invite him to the show. So I felt like it kind of made sense to be on the show when I invited him. So
yeah, I was going to say, it's not too often.
Doing this for you, Tom. I'm doing this for you, buddy.
Well, kudos to Josh because Josh is out here booking guests. This is not the only guest Josh has booked. Hopefully we have that surprise guest announcement coming up here pretty soon. But Josh is doing a great job booking the guests for Mock It Like It's Hot, making my life a little bit easier on Monday. And as Josh mentioned, we have the UK's finest, Tom Strachan, here with us. Tom, first and foremost, I know it's middle of the afternoon over there in England right now. I'm sure you're still hungover from the coronation this weekend. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, it's for me, this is just the perfect time of year. Like, we had all the great build up to the draft, and as much as I love that, then we get past the draft, and now it's best ball season, which for me, best ball is my real true love of fantasy. So it just feels like the fantasy season's never ending. There's always conversations we can kind of be having, and every single day you bring up YouTube and there's somebody else going live, or there's a new show, and there's just so much great content out there. I mean, how could you not love fantasy football?
Absolutely. Well, I love the love for fantasy football, but I like to start my shows off by letting the guests promo themselves. So please tell people what you're working on. You mentioned you're a big best ball writer and content creator. So tell people what they're working on and where they can find your work. I like to start the show off by letting you tell people what you do.
So first and foremost, you can find me over on the Fantasy Sanctuary YouTube channel. That's run with Rich Cooling at Dynasty Island on Twitter. And together, we kind of split things up. Rich does a huge amount of Dynasty work. I do a lot of best ball stuff, and then we combine to bring like a whole global view of fantasy. And really, there's everything you kind of want there. Rich's profiles, we have loads of great guests on it. You can find all my written work is either on Fantasy Pros. It used to be on Football Outsiders. I'm not sure if I'll be returning there this season. That situation's in flux a bit at the minute. But I'm also writing for Underdog as well. So loads of best ball content, loads of fantasy content. And yeah, I mean, you can see my Twitter name there on screen. It's pretty much relentless for content at the moment.
I love it. And we're going to be doing best ball drafts later on in the off season. And with you having the right time zone, I'll probably hit you back up again. If I'm having trouble finding a guest, I'd love to have you back on. We discovered you through the Dynasty Island stuff when you guys were doing the rookie profiles, because we do our Stars of Tomorrow series and you guys were just there for every single thing. And it was so great because it makes our life easier to share other people's content with the Fantasy Sanctuary, because you guys had all of the stuff out there nice and easy for us to get it shared. So we very much appreciate the work you guys are putting out. And that was the whole point of the Stars of Tomorrow series. So thank you for joining us and thank you for creating that rookie content. So
no, we really appreciate the work you guys do, sharing that. And, you know, not only is it just a really nice, positive thing to do, but it brought my eyes to different videos and different content from people, which stops you getting locked in on a prospect and having just one mindset on it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that in the pre-game, and I really appreciated that take, because that's how I use it too. You mentioned you don't watch a lot of college football, nor do I, so that's how I use them as well. So. All right, guys, let's get into the mocks. So this week we're putting, I don't want to say an end to our rookie mocks. We'll still have some rookie mocks going through, but we're going to do our last rookie mock for a little while now. It is going to be a 1 QB rookie mock, so no more Superflex. It's only 10 teams, no big rule changes, no tight end premium. So it's a very basic mock for those who haven't switched over to Superflex yet. I'm going to go ahead and get the mock up on the screen, which is this here. As you can see, we filled the draft up. Our friend Fantasy Faith is the leader of this mock draft. She is going to be probably taking Bijan at 101. I'm going to go ahead and click start the draft now so we can get started. So guys, it's pretty much an easy assumption that Bijan Robinson's going to go number 1. Faith makes that very easy for me. One of the big debates I've been having personally, and one of the big debates that I see happening throughout, fantasy football in general and rookie drafts, and it's a little harder when you're doing mocks because there is no team behind the mock draft. This is just kind of like, let's see where these guys fall. But my question is, Tom, when you start a draft, is it always best player available, or do you take into consideration team need, especially this early in the draft? And I want you guys to speak specifically to Jackson Smith-Njigba versus Jahmyr Gibbs. There are teams out there who need running back. There are teams out there who need wide receiver. Is one so much better than the other that they should be taking that guy first, Tom?
Well, I'm going to kick it off just by taking Jackson Smith-Njigba before time runs down.
Well, there you go.
And I think there's always scenarios where you can say, okay, I can lean towards team need over best player available. Like if you were at the 101 this year and you were already stacked at running back, but you really needed a third quarterback and you'd acquired the 101 via trade, nobody in your league was biting. You were willing to take a slight discount to move down one spot or two, and nobody was willing to do it. Then I do get the argument for taking somebody like Anthony Richardson there, or even possibly Bryce Young. But at the 102 in this kind of single quarterback league, I'm going with Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'm playing this from the mindset that I'm in a deep rebuild, or, I'm not ready to contend, and perhaps Jahmyr Gibbs wouldn't be the right choice for me. So I've gone with Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think if you're saying, okay, well, I'm building for a year or two's time, then it's very easy to think that Tyler Lockett, who I think is 31 this year, is going to be moved on after this season, and that slot role could become incredibly valuable for an offense which we saw last year was very good.
Sorry, the most recent pick threw me off a little bit there. We're going to have some discussion about that.
First, I love the live reactions.
First and foremost, Josh, before I kick to you, I want to defend myself against Faith real quick. I am not questioning Faith's knowledge. I am not questioning Faith's attention to detail. Last week in a Superflex draft, Faith pushed all quarterbacks to the side and went wide receiver with the second overall pick. And it threw me off a little bit because you don't often see zigs when everybody else is going to zag. So I'm not questioning whether or not Faith knew Bijan should be the number one pick. I'm questioning whether or not Faith cared that Bijan should be the number one pick. And that was my question there. But Josh, keep going with best player available versus addressing team needs.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you are sitting at the top of a rookie mock draft, odds are your team kind of sucked. A running back isn't going to change that. It's just like, sure, they can move the needle a little bit to start, but ideally what you're ultimately trying to do is build a long-lasting team. You don't do that with running backs. You do that with wide receivers. So it makes more sense to me to go the route of the wide receiver. Now, if you're a team that maybe traded up and you need that final piece to kind of get you over the hump because your wide receiver depth is very good, then sure, you can make the case for a Jahmyr Gibbs over Jackson Smith-Njigba. I still think JSN will have a great year one. Tyler Lockett has actually been a pretty healthy wide receiver, but 30 years, what happened to Keenan Allen last year?
Yeah.
Hamstring, and just missed half the season. Could that happen for Lockett? Absolutely, it could. It could happen for any wide receiver, no matter their age. So the way that, Detroit plans to use Jahmyr Gibbs, I think you're going to see a lot of, slot time and passing work on top of the, the rushing that'll come with it. But, it's a fair argument, but I'm always going to lean the wide receiver in that instance.
Gotcha. So even if a team is RB needy, are they close enough, Josh, that they should take JSN over Gibbs?
I would.
Are they far enough apart, I mean to say? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I think that you're still looking at a situation where, sure, you could take Gibbs and, maybe trade him at the deadline for more rookie picks down the line. But that just feels counterintuitive. I want to be able to take somebody that I can build around, not somebody that I can shuttle off in 6 months.
Gotcha. I usually have pre-planned questions before I get into the mock draft. And for those who haven't drafted with us before, the mock draft will finish long before the episode finishes. You guys are all very fast drafters, and I'm a very long talker. So there's going to be plenty of talking to do before we get to the end of the draft. And for anyone looking at the draft boarding and wondering what kind of psycho put 6 rounds in a rookie draft like my 2 co-hosts were today, there's a method to my madness that we will talk about at the end of the show. However, our good friend Burns went ahead and started his draft with Dalton Kincaid at the 1-6. I'm not saying it's a wrong pick because there's a lot of, I mean, putting it bluntly, disparaging talk about this draft class. And if you believe Kincaid is the best player available, tight end premium or not, you go get him this early in the draft. But Tom, looking at the players who are available around Dalton Kincaid, and I think the most glaring there is the player who went next, Zay Flowers. Is Kincaid for a tight end needy team? I guess this goes back to best player available versus team need. Is Kincaid worthy to go in those first 6 picks? It seems very early.
I think Kincaid's upside case is that he turns into, Travis Kelce. It's very clear that he's a fantastic receiving tight end. I mean, he was the only tight end who got drafted in the first round, so it's very easy to lean on that high-end draft capital and say, okay, the Bills see him as the final piece of their offense that they need. So his upside could be huge. I mean, it's probably easy for me to say that I sat here with Lamar Jackson's jersey hanging up behind me, but I would have leaned towards Zay Flowers. I feel like wide receivers typically, particularly those first round wide receivers, are a little easier to kind of know what you're getting from them. I think if you're hoping for Dalton Kincaid to do anything in his first year, it's definitely a complete lottery. I wrote an article recently for Underdog talking about rookie tight end success. And in half PPR, over 56% of tight ends in their rookie year have less than 4 points. So, it's really your best case scenario, is what you're hoping for 7-8 points, half PPR on average per week. And I think that's something which a lot of people feel like is going to be quite attainable. But when you dig into the numbers, so many rookies really miss that in their first year. The real upside case where you might hear people talking about is, okay, well, this is a guy who could get me 10 points a game. And it's like, I think a lot of people miss how rare that is for rookie tight ends. I think there's been 2 rookie tight ends in the last 23 years who've scored over 10 half PPR points per game in their rookie year. So I don't hate the pick. I think, Dalton Kincaid is somebody who clearly has a lot of talent and is clearly going to be a very good pass catcher. But it just comes down to team need an awful lot. And I haven't found myself taking a lot of any of the rookie tight ends in this draft because it seems like, I'm not saying they're being overvalued, but people are valuing them highly.
Yeah, and the reason the Kincaid opened my eyes as much as it did when he made the pick is I've done a few of these mock drafts, obviously, every Monday, and I've never seen him go that early, Josh. Now, I know you weren't a big fan of the landing spot, and honestly, Josh, I don't think it's unfair to say you're not a big fan of the rookie tight ends in this class in general, is kind of my takeaway from working with you for so long. So let's talk a little bit about Kincaid at 6 and just your thought on these tight ends in general.
I mean, I don't hate this tight end class.
I don't know. You seem.
Here's the thing. I don't go into seasons thinking that rookies are going to be freaking Kyle Pitts in year 1. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. I'd much rather just
Now that's back. More of a redraft discussion, though. I mean, this is about long-term value.
Well, and that's fair. But how often does a Travis Kelce come around in the NFL? Period. Every 10, 15 years, it feels like.
No, once ever, bitch. Don't talk bad about Travis.
Shut up. There's been a Gronkowski. There's been a good Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates. All right.
Yeah, how many consecutive tight end 1 seasons did any of them put together? Because I'm pretty sure Gronk
and 5 in a row. For the longest time, there hadn't been more than one in a row in terms of 1,000-yard seasons, and Kelsey's done that 7 years in a row. So
exactly.
And really, that's kind of my point. Taking Kincaid here, I feel like is a best case scenario. Taking a Sam Laporta in a 3rd round like I did is more ideal because I can just sit him on my taxi squad for 2 or 3 years. And if he becomes something great, if not, well, he was a 3rd round pick, whatever. When you spend that 1st round pick over the wide receivers or potentially the running backs that are going to get a lot more run early on, and even in the first 3 years, makes a little more sense. Now, in terms of an argument for Dalton Kincaid, in terms of team target share and percentage, last year, Ken Dorsey targeted the slot more than Brian Dable in Buffalo at almost 34%. And Kincaid ran almost exclusively kind of out wide and out of the slot at Utah. So if their ideology is we drafted Kincaid to be a big slot receiver, yeah, it makes more sense. And you can, I think, justify taking him in a first round, even if it is a non-tight end premium. Now, with that going forward, you still have the competition from Shakir. How many targets are going to go to Gabe Davis if he actually plays all 17 games? Is he the number 2 opposite Stephon Diggs? Then, yeah, there's a lot of value there for Kincaid, even as early as year 1. But, you look at situations like a Michael Mayer. I think that in the second round is great value. Same thing with Sam Laporta. Great value there in the third round when you look at, the opportunity cost with what could potentially happen in Detroit with now Jameson Williams missing the first 6 games. They don't really have a number 3 wide receiver. We know Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get targets. You don't spend a 12th overall pick on a running back unless you're planning to use him in a lot of different ways. So, I mean, there's opportunity cost, and this tight end class is solid. I mean, it's probably the best one we've seen since what was it, the Evan Ingram year, 2017, I believe, 2018, maybe one of those two. So, yeah.
Before we jump in, because Tom, I want to give you a little chance just to talk about how you do a lot of mock drafting in general. Actually, let's start with that, and then I want to get to a user question. So, Tom, first and foremost, do you do a lot of mock drafting, and do you do a lot with rookie mocks to learn ADP? And the reason I ask is, with you being such a big best ball guy, there was a real big snowball theory that was starting last year on Twitter that best ball drafts are better than mock drafting because there's skin in the game and you're getting a little bit more of like intelligent drafting, if you will. Not to say that mock drafting can't be intelligent. When you get a good group like we have, it's very good, but sometimes you don't always get a good group. So how do you just approach mock drafting in general, which is the whole point of Mock It Like It's Hot? It was the whole reason we started this show. So.
For me, mock drafts, pretty much just rookies only. I've got no interest in jumping into full mock drafts after the draft or anything like that. Like, I don't dynasty mock draft. I don't do redraft mock draft. I think redraft mock draft definitely has been replaced by best ball drafts, because you log on to Underdog or DraftKings, it's like you can draft from as low as $1, and just for having that skin in the game just seems to make people pay slightly more attention to it and actually approach it differently. But for rookies, I think it's invaluable. I think that particularly if you're in a good room like this, or if you're in one of the many Discords which are full of people who are really ready to pour over rookie details as early as January, it's really helpful to jump into them.
I love that. And so I'm going to just keep you going, Tom. We have a wonderful user question, and it's a big one, so it's going to cover your face up for a second, but I'll get it off the screen. So are we worried about too much exposure to a single player? And this is something that comes up in mock drafting, rookie drafts, any kind of drafting, really. He already has 3 shares of JSN because he was always the best player available. Should he have mixed it up a bit, excluding of trading out, of course? So I think in this draft, and using JSN as an example, it's hard because unless you were passing up Jahmyr Gibbs for JSN, I think the best player available wins out. But how do you handle player exposure? And again, Tom, this plays wonderfully into your best ball, because one of the things Underdog does is gives you that tool that shows you player exposure. So let's talk about player exposure in general.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a big proponent of having this balanced portfolio in some extent in best ball, and I've done articles for Fantasy Pros talking about what my kind of mindset is, and it's a sliding scale in best ball where in the first couple of rounds I don't want to be more than like 15% exposed to one player, because if one of those players goes down, it can really kill your portfolio straight from the off. But then as you go through the rounds, I have no problem in the 17th round onwards being 30%, 35% exposed to one player. And yes, that does mean you might miss out on certain breakouts, but that's the area where the opportunity cost is less. And it's the same for me in Dynasty. I think, I'm kind of getting through my Dynasty League mock drafts, rookie drafts at the minute, and I'm in 15 Dynasty Leagues, and there was a situation where I took Jordan Addison over Jackson Smith and Jigba, but part of that was because it felt right for the team as well. I think Jordan Addison could easily have a better rookie season than Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I had enough shares of Jackson Smith and Jigba that even if he ends up having a huge breakout this year, I won't be left kicking myself. And I think, it comes down to how everybody plays the game. If you want to strictly go best player available at all times and really hope you're going to maximize your value, that's entirely fair. But I think there is an element of going, okay, well, I just want to diversify slightly because there's every chance that I can be wrong, because the NFL gets it wrong plenty as well. So why not just hedge against myself slightly sometimes?
Yeah. So Josh, if you're stuck at the 102 and you've mentioned previously in the show, it's JSN for you. Is there a limit where, you're in 10 dynasties, and I'm certain that's probably an undercount for you, but you're in 10 dynasties and you've walked away with 5 shares of JSN. Are you going to take Jahmyr Gibbs to diversify a little bit?
Well, to kind of go off of what Tom said, it really just kind of depends on the team structure. Like, I'm looking more in terms of, all right, how do I have my tier set up, right? If we're in a 1 QB league, that tier is Bijan at 1, and then tier 2 for me is Gibbs and JSN. So, if I have some rookie drafts where, I have, 4 or 5 shares of JSN, sure, I don't have a problem pivoting to Gibbs, but if that doesn't make sense for that particular team, then I'm going to stick with JSN. Now, would I reach and then take a Quentin Johnston or a Jordan Addison? No, because I think that JSN is head and shoulders above those players. So it doesn't make sense in that perspective for me to make that move. Now, Ryan, we did one over the weekend where Quentin Johnston did go ahead of JSN. I already have a share of JSN in one league. I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to try to trade up to get JSN because right now he's a value at 104 in my opinion.
Yeah, you even mentioned that. I said you mentioned that in the draft chat that you didn't know how he was still there for you. So.
Exactly. I'm like, I'll make that move up. Fine by me.
As we're wrapping up on the draft here, just a reminder, we will continue to talk after the draft. I am going to get to a question. Tom, you kind of surprised me when you said you took Addison over JSN because you believe Addison could have a better rookie season. And I tend to agree that is definitely a possibility when you look at the two offenses. The question I was going to put out there that you kind of already jumped ahead on is I think there's a big debate about the wide receiver 3 between Quentin Johnston and Jordan Addison. And I, at least initially, was making the argument that Johnston being tied to Justin Herbert needs to be given heavy credence when you don't know how long Kirk Cousins is in Minnesota and who's going to replace him in Minnesota. So it sounds like you're certainly Addison over Johnston, but is there an argument to be made, or is it just a firmly Addison over Johnston for you, Tom?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the way that they play the game. So, Jordan Addison, pretty much he's a slot receiver first, and then, he can play outside as well because he's such a good route runner. And that kind of slot role tends to be quite dependable. Even if you see bad quarterbacks play, it doesn't always kill the value of a slot wide receiver. I mean, let's look at somebody like Jarvis Landry had one of his better seasons with Baker Mayfield,
Yep.
And just because Baker Mayfield's landing in Tampa now, it doesn't mean we should absolutely kill Chris Godwin. Yes, you temper expectations slightly, but I think the Vikings have shown that they're only going to make a move for a quarterback when they know it's going to be an upgrade on Kirk Cousins. They could have taken Will Levis this year, and they didn't. They could have moved up to get him in the second round. They didn't. And they didn't throw money at the board to try and just get up there to take the third quarterback or so, not knowing who it would be. So I'm quite comfortable in that. In terms of Quentin Johnston, I mean, he is that big-bodied receiver who can go down the field and really play well. And he's going to go get those flashy contested catches and stuff. But, I mean, are we certain that Keenan Allen retires after this season? Are we certain that Mike Williams gets moved on? I mean, it could be another year from now where Quentin Johnston is still fighting for snaps amongst those 3. Or if Keenan Allen gets moved on, what's to say they don't draft a replacement? So I just find that the high-value touches are going to give you weak winning performances, definitely from Quentin Johnston when they hit, but he feels quite boom or bust, and it feels like it could be quite a rocky road. And I'm more gambling on a player like Jordan Addison, who's going to see easier catches from the slot than somebody like Quentin Johnston, who is going to have to really turn in big performances for his points.
Yeah, and it's thinking like that, Josh, that really, I mean, honestly, I was Quentin Johnston starting with the draft all the way up to even draft night on our live draft stream. I was defending Quentin Johnston, but the more I dug in, the more I have switched over to Jordan Addison and even flipped them in my rankings, Josh. So I just continue with that train of thought. Is it definitely Addison over Johnston for you, or is there an argument to be made?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made. It is Addison over Johnston for me. As you can see, I took Addison at the 104 ahead of Johnston.
Absolutely.
But I think that you can you can group Addison, Johnston, Flowers all in the same tier. And for me, that is tier 3 in these one quarterback drafts. Sure, you can look at it from a long-term play. As Tom mentioned, Johnston, sure, if you're playing the long game, I think him over Addison is just fine. Look at the situation. I mean, he's tied to one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, that alone has value on top of the fact that he has the high draft capital. He was a first-round pick. I kind of go back to Brandon Ayuk when he was drafted by San Francisco. I think he was the 6th wide receiver taken in that draft, but he ended up being a first-round draft pick. There were some people that, maybe weren't as high on Ayuk heading into that draft, but he ends up with first-round draft capital. That's going to vault him right up. He's landed in a good situation. Even playing opposite Debo, had over 1,000 yards last year, and I understand Debo missed some time there, but he showed that he can be a number 1 wide receiver there. Makes perfect sense. And I think you kind of have to apply that same logic to Quentin Johnston. Yes, he's playing behind Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but you don't spend a first-round pick on a wide receiver if you're not going to find ways to get him the football. Again, they threw over 700 passes last year, 711 pass attempts last year.
So
there's plenty to go around.
You lumped Zay Flowers into that tier, and I find that interesting, Josh. And I feel like this is something we need to address as a fantasy community, and that is the Baltimore Ravens could be running a very different offense, and maybe not 700 attempts very different, but certainly more attempts very different, Josh. So is Zay Flowers belongs in that discussion?
Oh, 100% for me. I mean, you look at Todd Monken offenses, they're not afraid to throw the football. You just looking at the pro comps, not going into college just because they play less games, but 2017, 2018 with Tampa, 605, 625 pass attempts. Even going into Cleveland in 2019 with Baker, 539 pass attempts. Baltimore, the last 2 years, 2 years ago, 611 attempts. Last year, 488. They're going to throw the football. Like, you don't go out and spend another first-round pick on a wide receiver after drafting a wide receiver 2 years ago in the first round, then signing OBJ to the type of contract that you signed him to. They're going to run 3 wide. You still have one of the better tight ends in football in Mark Andrews. I think you can throw out targets to the running back because it's been pretty well proven that mobile quarterbacks a la Lamar Jackson, they're not going to do these short little dump-offs because they can run for 6, 7, 8 yards and get the first down. Monken is going to spread it out. He's going to throw the football. Now you have yourself a solid 3 wide with OBJ, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, pending he comes back moderately healthy from the Liz Frank injury. But I think he's probably your 4th option there. Zay Flowers can run out of the slot along with Mark Andrews. And even if OBJ has some semblance of past OBJ, he should be good for at least 100, 110 targets, I'd say. But you're ultimately drafting Zay Flowers to be sort of that heir apparent for OBJ, in my opinion.
So I just want to piggyback on all the excellent points you made there, Josh. But one of the key things with this offense as well is that this offense has been slow over the last few years. Greg Roman's plays were notoriously long in verbiage, so it took a long time to call the plays in the huddle. And John Harbaugh, when they moved on from Greg Roman, said that he looked for somebody who talked about going hurry up and all the different ways they could do that. At Todd Monken's introductory press conference, again, he talked about it, and he spent this was unprompted as well, and he spent a good couple of minutes talking about all the different ways that Todd Monken had impressed him, talking about, we could pick up the pace by doing this, we can do that. And pace is such a key part of fantasy because more plays, more pace, more points generally. And I think the pace of this team, they're never going to be the fastest offense in the league because they are going to run the ball at times. They do have a good defense. But if the Ravens jump from sort of down in that bottom tier of pace up to sort of anywhere close to the middle tier of situation neutral pass rate, then that's also going to be really good for a player like Zay Flowers' fantasy profile.
Tom, I would ask you to continue. Should we be worried? Obviously, there's going to be an increase of volume, but should we be worried about Mark Andrews' target share?
I don't think so. I think, Lamar's shown that when he's on the field, a lot of what he does with the ball comes down to which players he trusts. Players like James Prochet and Tylan Wallace and that, like, they never got the targets even when they were on the field because we never seemed to develop that rapport with Lamar. Whereas Andrews, he has that freedom to create what he sees on the field. If he sees something different to what's there, then he runs that route, much like Travis Kelce. And Lamar and him have that natural connection. It seems to be really strong. I think, there's possibly, we're not going to see the kind of Mark Andrews performances that we got, not last year, but the year before, when Tyler Huntley was just consistently peppering him. Yeah. But I think this is going to be a case of a rising tide lifts all boats, and it should be enough to sustain Andrews, top 3 tight end worthiness, definitely.
Josh, is Mark Andrews your dynasty tight end 2 right now?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think you can make a pretty solid case that your top 4 in any order are Kelce, Andrews, Pitts, and Hockenson, in my opinion. The way that the offense shaped up in Minnesota when Hockenson landed there, especially giving up, 2 day 2 picks to get him, tells me that they want to re-sign him. And I think the future of that passing game in Minnesota is Jefferson, Hockenson, and Addison in some order, which JJ is obviously one there. But
I was going to say,
piggybacking on Andrews, I mean, just looking at those last 3 years in the NFL with Monken calling plays, the wide receiver 1 in that offense was 136 targets, 138 targets, 138 targets. That's going to translate to Mark Andrews being the wide receiver 1 there. Like I said, I think OBJ is still viable. He's going to draw attention from defenses, but he's not the wide receiver 1 that's going to command 130, 140 targets. And let's not forget that 2019 Todd Monken offense in Cleveland, OBJ was part of that offense. That's why this synergy made a lot of sense. And I think a lot of that is being lost with the fantasy community because I haven't seen anybody even talk about that.
I also think, Josh, you may have inadvertently unlocked what Minnesota's offensive strategy is, and that's getting players whose last name end with the Sun sound. I didn't make that connection until just now. Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson. I think they're just going to start loading up on those players the rest of the draft. We've now unlocked it. Don't ready.
Forget, there's Alexander Madison as well.
Madison, oh my goodness, Cook is gone. He doesn't fit the rhyme scheme anymore. He's done. So, I love it. So Jorge brought up a good question in the draft where he asked about how people were going to handle quarterbacks. He said it much funnier because he wanted to know when we were going to the red light district and drafting Hooker. But quarterbacks in a 1 quarterback draft, Tom, the value is interesting. I was lucky enough to be on Club Fantasy's Dynasty After Party last night, and we talked a lot about this where the quarterbacks are kind of some of the best players in this draft, where normally in 1 quarterback, they don't hold a ton of value. And I kind of said in my rankings, I felt like they belonged towards the back end of the first round. In this draft, we saw that with one of the quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson, but Young and Stroud fell. How are you approaching quarterbacks in these 1 QB leagues? Are we taking these mid to lower tier running backs over these quarterbacks regardless of team need?
Yeah, looking back in hindsight, perhaps where I took Devon Achane, you could have made an argument for taking Bryce Young there, or perhaps CJ Stroud. I definitely would have taken Anthony Richardson if he'd reached me. In terms of like Will Levis and Hendon Hooker, though, in these formats, I mean, acquiring quarterbacks in single QB dynasty is just so much easier than Superflex, and it just can't be stated enough how we don't need to necessarily be taking shots on guys like Hendon Hooker and Will Levis. I find it really difficult to put any kind of draft capital in them. I mean, where Will Levis went at the back of the 3rd, that feels probably kind of fine. Hendon Hooker, I probably would have let go for another round and a half, because ever since he was drafted, the Lions are talking about wanting to extend Jared Goff, which makes all the sense in the world because he has been a good player in that system. So if Hendon Hooker doesn't get onto the field this year, I mean, how old is he going to be by the time that he does? And how much time will he have missed? We know he missed a good chunk of last season because of the ACL. He's clearly not going to get much playing time this season. So if you're talking another 2 years by the time that he's a starter, I just don't want to be clogging up my bench for players like that.
Yeah. And Josh, I just want you to continue with that same thought. Like Tom brought up, Richardson seems to be the prized possession, certainly because of his rushing upside. But just looking specifically at the players who went before Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, you have a lot of the second and even a third round wide receiver, Josh Downs, Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed, and Rashee Rice. Landing spot obviously played out pretty well for Rashee Rice. You could argue landing spots on the other ones, but are they worthy as these second and third round wide receivers of going ahead of the first 2 picks of the NFL draft?
Yeah. In a nutshell. Yeah. I'll be honest. I actually considered Richardson at the 104. And a lot of that it's the rushing upside. So what he brings to the table from, especially in a 1 quarterback format. But there wasn't really, and we've talked about landing spots and talent amongst this class, et cetera, for quite some time. It's hard to argue when a quarterback with the rushing potential of an Anthony Richardson gets the top 5 draft capital and lands in a primo spot. Why can't he outperform all of these guys that could very well end up as no better than a wide receiver 2? Yeah. Like I'm willing to take that chance on a quarterback, even in a 1 quarterback league. But to answer your question, when it comes to Young and Stroud, yes, they're starters. They don't offer the same type of rushing upside. So unless you see 4,500 plus and 30 touchdowns annually from these guys in the future, they're not going to justify that level of draft capital that you see with an Anthony Richardson, because he has that 800 plus rushing yard upside.
I like that. I'm just going to throw up a comment. Our buddy Gator J, friend of the show, said he was just here to get roasted. But in other words, it sounds like you guys both really enjoyed his Richardson pick, where Josh, you were considering him at 104. Jay gets him at 109. That's value at this point, Jay. So yep. No roasting here. You did the right thing. Something else I found interesting in this draft, Josh, Zach Charbonnett had been kind of like the fan favorite as the RB3. The recent hype around Kendre Miller seems to be working. Kendre Miller moves all the way up to the 108. Charbonnett falls to the 201. What's your take on Kendre Miller versus Zach Charbonnett?
I still would prefer Charbonnett, the talent wise. I mean, Ryan, we were in a draft that's been taking a year and a half, and Achane was the 3rd running back that came off the board.
Yeah, big Achane fan there. I was actually trying to trade for that pick, and they didn't work out because they just wanted to take Achane. So. Yeah,
so I mean, I think Miller and Achane are starting to kind of rise a little bit over Charbonnett simply because people feel that they have more immediate impact. I mean, you've got the impending suspension with Kamara there in New Orleans, which is going to open up opportunity for Miller. They bring in Jamal Williams. We've seen pass catching ability from Williams in the past with Green Bay. So, Miller could essentially slot into that Mark Ingram role, and, Williams kind of fills in on the pass catching side. So there's definitely opportunity there, not just in year 1, but also down the line. Achane, I think everybody's kind of talked this and beat the dead horse enough that, Miami loves speed. He's speed personified. I mean, I've been seeing all kinds of clips where he's run faster than Tyreek Hill, which, hey, you know what? If you really want to put your name on that claim, by all means, die on that dumb hill. But Charbonnett, for me, has the talent. I kind of group him into that, like, Alexander Madison, like, elite level tier of handcuffs, where the moment if something happens to Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnett has top 12 upside, just like that, because he is that good. And we know the system that Seattle runs. Is it the most ideal if you need to start a running back right away? Well, of course not. And I get that. So it makes sense why he's falling to the, the RB4, RB5, sometimes even RB6 role, because there's a chance that he may not. And I know Pete Carroll has talked about, using him more in this pass catching role. I don't remember what show I was on. Maybe it was our show, the last time we were talking about landing spots. But, it kind of feels like when they spent that 7th round pick on Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia, that McIntosh is going to kind of have that pass catching role. Like he's going to fight with Travis Homer for that, whereas Charbonnett becomes the direct backup to Kenneth Walker in sort of that, first, second down, occasional third down role. Sure, yeah, it sucks, but you know what? If you're taking a running back in the second round, I don't really think you're trying to start him right away. You're just looking for, an insurance policy. Maybe you're able to flip him to the manager that has Kenneth Walker. Maybe the moment that Kenneth Walker gets hurt, God forbid he doesn't, knock on wood, but if he does, now again, you have that primo asset that maybe you can flip for a first round pick.
I like it. And Tom, I'm going to just have you continue there. And I'm glad Josh brought Devon Achane into this as well. First and foremost, is 108 too early for Kendre Miller? So we're just going to put the spotlight right on the draft there with our buddy FF Chris B. Is 1-8 too early for Kendre Miller? But more importantly, do you have definitive thoughts on how you would rank Achane, Charbonnett, and Kendre Miller?
I think it's probably for 108, it's probably an area where Kendre Miller will be going if Alvin Kamara gets a long suspension. I think it's very easy to see this Saints team just being ready to move on from Alvin Kamara. But he is that kind of bruiser, 215 pounds, 5'11". There's a lot of undersized running backs in this class, but he's one who you could very easily see getting goal line work. But the question kind of becomes, okay, so how much goal line work does he get if you've got Jamal Williams, who you signed as a priority free agent, who just scored 17 touchdowns and like 12 of them came from inside the 10-yard line? And, of course, we've also got Taysom Hill, who we saw last year. Alvin Kamara would get pulled off the field, and it would be Taysom Hill who'd go in for those kind of goal line packages at times. Kamara had 2-3 rushing touchdowns last season in a 5-year low for him. So it's tricky projecting what 2023 looks like for Kendre Miller. I think in terms of Devon Achane, much lighter back at 188 pounds. So he's definitely not somebody who you're going to get all that kind of goal line work from. But one of the reasons why I took him at the 202 and why I feel quite confident in an early second round pick is that explosivity that Josh kind of mentioned, 4.32 or so 40-yard dash. And he is going to make the kind of plays that are going to pop up on red zone a lot. He's going to make those kind of highlight plays. And I think there'll be a very real chance for you to be able to flip him for more than you invest in him in rookie drafts. I think if you're a team picking early in the second round, then it's fair to say that you're probably not a great team or you've still got holes on that roster. And you look at guys like Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, who both missed time with injuries last season and haven't necessarily been the most healthy guys throughout the last few years. It's very easy to say, okay, there could be a situation where Devon Achane is going to see meaningful snaps and you could flip him for a late first round pick in 2024. Or, whenever you start projecting those picks, if you can get any kind of random pick and somebody's like, oh, well, this could be a mid first, or this could be a late, I'm quite happy to play the lottery on it and just hope that their team completely capitulates.
I like that. Two guys I want to talk about before we start getting into the end of the show stuff. I call these guys the draft afterthoughts. Kayshon Boutee had one of the worst pro days in history after having a great freshman year at LSU. He is an LSU wide receiver, which is done historically well in the NFL. And then Sean Tucker, who the heart thing came up during his pro day, and he goes completely undrafted. So these are kind of red flag players, Tom. Are you avoiding these guys altogether? Would it have to be an insanely deep draft like what we had today where you're even considering these guys? Whereas Boutee was a third-round pick by our buddy Burns, and then Tucker went all the way in the fifth to Josh. I'm going to give you guys both time to talk about it. But with the red flags surrounding these guys, are they off of your draft board, Tom, or is it just when the price is right?
They're definitely not off my draft board because I think there's a clear upside with them. I mean, Kayshon Boutee, he fell, and it was incredibly disappointing seeing his combine. It was incredibly disappointing seeing his pro day and how little effort he seemed to put into it. And the hype just completely disappeared on him. But if you said that he was going to land in a spot where the wide receiver depth chart was completely lacking, then you'd be all in on it. And the Patriots, outside of Juju Smith-Schuster, it's pretty grim there. And it's very easy to see how Bill Belichick, he enforces his kind of discipline that he's famous for. And Kayshon Boutee gets right. And perhaps he does have more upside. So, I mean, how many third-round picks in Dynasty really turn into good, reliable players anyway? So I don't mind
Hey, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin are two that come off my mind really quick. So.
Well, that's it. And there's players like them, and I think Antonio Gibson was going there in his rookie season. So there are the guys who turn up good, but there's plenty of players who completely fade. I mean, you look in our draft here, and Cedric Tillman definitely has a lot of players ahead of him. Juice Vaughn, the Cowboys could bring back Zeke Elliott. Chase Brown could see no time. So it's definitely, I don't mind taking him. In terms of Sean Tucker, he's somebody that with, I think it was a heart issue, wasn't it? Which, that definitely doesn't feel like a great situation. I think I can understand why people would take him off the draft boards, particularly in Dynasty, because it's like, okay, well, is he just going to never see the field? And when he does see the field, how valuable is it going to be? Because last year, the Bucs offensive line was awful. We saw both Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White really struggle with efficiency, and obviously Lenny's not there, but White is there. I think that there's a role for Tucker in that offense. Rachaad White, he can be the lightning whilst Tucker can be the thunder or something similar to that. But I just kind of worry about Sean Tucker's ceiling. I'm not sure that I really see him delivering out, a back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons whilst he was in college. But I don't think that's going to be what we see. I think we're going to see somebody who maybe puts up 400 or 500 yards in a season, gets a couple of touchdowns. Maybe there's the odd game if Rachaad White misses any time. But, I mean, how much can you really gamble on this Bucs offense being particularly fruitful for fantasy this season anyway?
I think they scored 5 rushing touchdowns total last year, and Brady probably had one of those. Like, it's just ridiculous. Josh, just your thoughts on those players. Are there enough red flags to remove either one of them from your draft board entirely?
I mean, this isn't an actual NFL draft. If they get hurt, they get hurt. Like, I'm not investing the level of
certainly,
thousands and millions of dollars on these players. So, I take everything in opportunity cost. So, I mean, for me, 5th round of a rookie draft, these players, they're likely not making a final roster or even on the roster in the next year, right?
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I think Tucker, heart issue or not, is a better player than Rachaad White, straight up.
Whoa.
So, yeah, I don't think that, Tucker could very easily come in and be the RB1 on that team. Like, this is a team very much like Arizona where they're reshaping this offense. And right now, they're just trying to put the best players on the field. Like, we know the wide receivers are there. Mike Evans is there. Chris Godwin's there. Russell Gage probably there, at least for this year because of the contract. Yeah. Every other position, including quarterback, is up for grabs. If Sean Tucker comes into camp and balls out the way that I think he can, he's going to see an opportunity. Obviously, he has the draft capital mark because of the undrafted free agent, so he's not going to get that kind of priority. But we've seen those types of players shine through. Danny Woodhead, I believe, was undrafted too. He made a mark in fantasy.
James Robinson is the recent darling.
James Robinson as well. He came out and balled out. He beat out whatever minimal competition that he had, i.e. Carlos Hyde, I believe.
He got Leonard Fournette cut.
Exactly. And by the way, some guy named Austin Eckler was also undrafted. Like, this type of stuff happens. Now, again, I
heard it here first. Josh says Sean Tucker is Austin Eckler. That's all you guys need to know. Thanks for joining. No.
So again, like a 5th round dart throw, I'm 100% fine with. I'm also fine too with a 4th round dart throw. I mean, I kind of lump these guys in the same category. There's plenty of running backs I think that are going ahead of him that, I'm fine with taking, but I'm probably going to take Tucker ahead of them. McIntosh being one, Evan Hall, Eric Gray. You could probably even make a case for Abanaconda, in all honesty. But, I'm more likely to spend a pick probably on Izzy or Gray, especially if I have Saquon Barkley, which I do in one league, and I did take Gray over Tucker. But I ended up dropping some fab to get Tucker on my roster after the fact. So there's opportunity there. But when it comes to Kayshon Boutee, like, I think a 3rd round's a little too high just for my taste. Just because the athletic profile just really isn't there. He didn't get strong draft capital. I understand the hierarchy of wide receiver weapons isn't all that great in New England at the moment, but I just don't really see, like, sure, maybe he could get some run over Devontae Parker. Maybe. I mean, Parker's always hurt. Juju's going to be the focal point. They have Tyquan Thornton they spent a second-round pick on. You also have to factor into you have a new offensive coordinator there, so things are going to kind of shake the way that Bill O'Brien sees everything shaking out. Sure, he's worth a dart throw. I think third round may be a little too high in my opinion.
Gotcha. All right. So the reason I do these super long drafts is there are folks out there who trade every single one of their draft picks away, and then they need to fill their taxi squads up after the draft. And you're going to do that with waivers. And so in a typical league, you're probably going to see 40 to 50 guys drafted. In our draft, 60 guys were drafted. So what I'd like you guys to do, Tom, I'm going to start with you. Looking at the last 2 rounds of this draft, the players who are most likely to be available on waivers in a league, who are the players that you would target immediately if you had 1 or 2 spots to fill up on your taxi squad?
So I think I quite like targeting running backs here because it's very easy to see how movement could really help them. So like Kenny McIntosh, Dwayne McBride, particularly McBride, you look at the Vikings, if Dalvin Cook gets moved on, then all of a sudden Alexander Mattison moves up, then Dwayne McBride can become, have some standalone value possibly. Puka Nacua, I think, you look at that LA Rams depth chart and wide receiver, it is miserable after Cooper Kupp. So he's somebody that I would like to take a shot on. They're the real standouts. I'll let Josh weigh in, see if there's anyone he particularly likes.
Perfect. Josh, keep it going.
Yeah, well, Tucker obviously is one that stands out to me.
Obviously, you took him.
Yeah, Puka Nacua, mostly just for the name, but also like opportunity there. Like I was literally this morning, right before we hopped on this draft, I was going through and looking at last year's Rams team because I'm trying to put everything together for my projections. And they're basically giving every wide receiver a shot to be something behind Cooper Kupp. So they need somebody to shine through. We know the love affair that Sean McVay has with Ben Skoranek, but everybody else, go win a job. Tutu Atwell, Brandon Powell, you can fit now Nacua into that. Van Jefferson is still there. Seemingly always finds a way to get hurt. There's jobs up for grab. Puka Nacua's got some juice. Like, if it's sitting in this 4th, 5th, God forbid you're actually doing a rookie draft that has 6 rounds, find a way to grab Puka Nacua. And I would also don't mind taking a shot on, A.T. Perry there, I think is a good one. Another name that I'm kind of intrigued by, and it's not because he actually had a ton of receptions at Kentucky, but Chris Rodriguez, I think, is somebody that could find himself in a situation where he could get some work. What happens if Sam Howell sucks and Washington finds themselves in the top 5 of the 2024 NFL draft? Why would they not look to potentially move Antonio Gibson midseason and get some type of draft capital return for a premium pass catching back?
Yeah.
And then now you're working Brian Robinson and Christian Rodriguez there as kind of like a 1-2 tandem.
One other name I'll throw out there just because of the draft capital, and I know it's a terribly crowded wide receiver room. Trey Tucker was a 3rd round pick, and he's going all the way down here. And I understand nobody wants a big piece of the Raiders wide receiver room, and they've literally signed like 5 guys this offseason. But the draft capital is there for him. That's the last name I'm going to
100%.
Yeah. All right, guys. So before we wrap up, I've decided to torture my guest. I came up with this idea over the weekend, and I have a doozy to get us started. Bijan Robinson is the hype of the draft right now. And what I want to do is I want to play a little game of keep, trade, cut. And with all due respect to Najee Harris, I had to kick him out of this list because he was the easy cut. So we are going to look at Bijan Robinson, last year's darling Breece Hall, and 3 years ago's darling, or I guess 4 years ago's darling, Jonathan Taylor. Keep, trade, cut. Josh, I'm putting you on the spot because you work for Club Fantasy. Keep, trade, cut. Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson.
You're a fucking asshole. Starting with that. Obviously, the keep here is Bijan Robinson for me. I don't think it's much of a secret. Trade, probably Breece Hall. I will say, coming back from the ACL does worry me a smidge. The cut here for me is JT, and it's not because I don't love JT. It's just an age thing when you're dealing with running backs. That's all.
There you go. Tom?
But I think he's going to have an absolutely phenomenal season. If Anthony Richardson actually starts early, they're going to need to lean on him very, very heavily. I think the Colts would be very stupid if they play Anthony Richardson the whole entire draft or the whole entire season. But that's another topic for another day.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it the same, but I'm going to cut Jonathan Taylor for slightly different reasons. I think although you could have a great game in terms of running efficiency, we see that time and time again with dual threat quarterbacks. It lets the running backs really clock up the yards. I think what we're going to see is a complete decrease in the passing game for him if Anthony Richardson's there, for the reasons you mentioned earlier, Josh, about how running quarterbacks, they don't check down to their running backs as often. So if he loses that, there's a good chunk of his value gone. I'm not sure Jonathan Taylor's one of the better running backs in the red zone. We've seen that 2 years ago when he had his monster season, even then he had a huge amount of red zone touches compared to other running backs and wasn't getting into the end zone at an above average rate. And I just feel like we've probably already seen the best of Jonathan Taylor. And in terms of fantasy value, I doubt we ever get quite as high as we do. But I feel this time next year, it's going to be even lower than it currently is.
There you go.
Yeah, that pass catching work for Jonathan Taylor is going to evaporate very quickly.
Yeah, and historically, the offense with Shane Steichen, they don't throw it. It happens enough, but not enough to make someone fantasy relevant, and not all to.
They didn't even
player.
have 70 targets to the running backs last year in Philly.
I love it, and the whole point of this segment was to get you guys to talk bad about one player, and who knew it would be Jonathan Taylor today. So
yeah, for someone that loves Jonathan Taylor as much as you do, why would you bring this on to not only yourself but the audience? Like,
I do love that you hedged, Josh, that you're like, he's going to have a wonderful season, but I'm still cutting him.
No, I mean, he is. But I do think that, again, it all depends. If this is strictly for 2023, then it's cut Breece Hall. But
Okay.
if it's long-term thinking, it's cut Jonathan Taylor. And I don't think it's that big of a question when you look at the three that you grouped into that scenario.
I totally get it. Guys, that's the end of the show. First and foremost, thank you for everybody who rode with us in the chat. Thank you to everybody who drafted with us and drafts with us every single Monday. These shows are very boring if we don't have live people in the draft. I appreciate every single one of you. Tom, remind everybody where they can find your work, what you're working on, and just thank you for joining the show today.
Yeah, you can find us on YouTube at The Fantasy Sanctuary. Pretty much any flavor of fantasy football you're after, it'll be there. You can find my work on underdognetwork.com, Fantasy Pros, and find me on Twitter at NFL_Tstrack. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm a big fan of everything you guys are doing and really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, we love having you. Josh.
See, this is why we bring guests on, so they can hype up our minimal egos.
Exactly. These are all legally binding things that we can use as endorsements whenever we feel like. Josh, tell everybody goodbye.
Bye.
There you go. A man a few words because he knows I'm about to promo everything we're doing at Club Fantasy.
Basically,
so let's start with, we have a Dynasty show now, and I was lucky enough to be the guest last night for Dynasty After Party, where we looked at Club Fantasy's rookie rankings. And if you weren't aware, we just dropped our Superflex and one quarterback rankings this week. And last night, Michael Sicoli and I took a look at those rankings and figured out what we liked and what we didn't like about it. And there's even a very cool segment on the show where Michael looks at trades that have happened in Dynasty leagues and kind of like rates the trades and how we think about them. So if you're looking to get involved with that, make sure you're sending us your trade offers. Make sure you look for Dynasty After Party. That's going to be, I believe, every Sunday at 9:30 Eastern. We're going to have our Wednesday show back again this week, Wednesday, 7:00 live Eastern every single week. It's no pun intended. It's with Josh, Joe Zolo, and myself. And this week we are having our very special fantasy appreciation episode. I'm not going to name all the guests because I don't have the list in front of me right now, but we are going to have 8 to 9 guests from around the industry, and we're going to give them 10 to 15 minutes just to tell you folks what they're working on and why you should be following them. So if you're looking for new follows on Twitter and you're looking to dominate your fantasy league, this is an episode you don't want to miss. That's going to be Wednesday at 7:00 Eastern. We have our golf show every single Tuesday with Kelly and Adam. Their picks are absolutely fantastic when it comes to golf DFS. They crush it. Josh does such a great job with the graphics. If you are not just into fantasy football, you are a total degenerate and you want to get into some golf DFS, this is a show that needs to be a part of your rotation because Kelly and Adam are going to take care of you. And as always, this show is going to be back every single Monday at 11. I put the invite out to draft with us at 9:00. So make sure you're following Club Fantasy on all of the socials at at Club Fantasy FFL, but specifically on Twitter, that's where we're going to release the invite every single Monday at 9 o'clock. The draft starts at 11 o'clock. And next week, we are finally moving away from rookie drafts. We are moving into Dynasty Startup with the aforementioned Kelly Singh, great friend of the show, great friend of Club Fantasy, and one of the faces of Women of Fantasy Football. I cannot wait for that draft. Josh?
Real quick, we do have the next episode of Her Story in the Making Tuesday night as well. Britt Flynn sits down with Casey Kasem to get real.
Well, there you go. So we're going to have a really great week of Women of Fantasy Football. So first and foremost, thank everybody for tuning in. We appreciate every single one of you. This show would be terribly boring if you weren't involved with it. So make sure to tune in next week, next Monday at 11 o'clock. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. I will see